Well, welcome. This
Looks
is
like we're rocking and rolling.
I hope so. Did you change the title on it? Very good. So here we are talking about chapter 4 of the story, and we're back at Mr. Brews. We enjoyed that last week, and just a couple of things to share with y'all. Today is Buy Your Pastor a Beer Day. And so that's kind of neat. And bear with us, Laura's checking the sound because it's a little...
She gave us the thumbs up.
She gives us a thumbs up. There's a little more ambiance noise going on around us, so we want to make sure that everyone can hear us quite well. But yeah, Buy Your Pastor a Beer. I didn't know that was an actual day, but
I've never heard of it before, so I feel bad. I've neglected my pastors before this point in time all these years.
But I've had like about 5 or 6 Facebook posts that have come across. So I'm gonna.
Some of y'all are out somewhere buying.
So I'm gonna go hang out at the Back 40 Grill or at Gators or here at Mr. Brew all day and just hope. But this one's to Gabby. Thank you, Gabby, for buying me a beer. She didn't know that she was gonna do that, but no, I'm just kidding. So anyways, chapter 4 of the story. It's been great going through the story and
so we got through Genesis
so
in 3 sections right there. And now we're jumping on into Exodus.
Yeah, and I think it's perhaps 2 chapters of the story go through Exodus, maybe, or maybe it's 3. I don't know.
It was 3, right?
Of Exodus. Is it 3?
Oh, how quickly are we going through Exodus?
Exodus,
are you saying?
right.
Yes, I think Exodus is in 2. I'm sorry, Genesis is in 3.
Genesis is in 3.
Look how prepared we are.
So, but long story short, just to try to connect the week, we ended last week with the story of Joseph.
Yeah.
With his grace and forgiveness that he gives to his brothers and extends to them, and just the amazing climax of the book of Genesis. And so now we transition into Exodus, and we know Exodus very much for the story of Moses. And so when we talk about Moses, everybody knows the plagues, the 10 plagues, and the actual Exodus, and them going through the Red Sea, and
those are the
and eventually
10
to
commandments.
the Promised Land is eventually where we end up at the 40 years of wandering before that happens. But to kind of bridge a little bit of the two between last chapter and this chapter, it's important. There's some things to note. The book of Genesis really sets up the stage for the book of Exodus. I mean, naturally so. They're not meant to be read as 2 separate, complete writings.
In some ways, it's almost like, you read Luke, Acts. You don't read one without the other. I mean, they're just meant to flow one into the next.
And in fact, I would say the whole Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all 5 of those books of the Bible are meant to be read as a singular story of God's plan of salvation for his people. And to which Exodus and the Exodus with Moses being kind of the climactic moment of, in my opinion, the
it's like
Pentateuch.
the big salvation story.
It's
obviously,
the big salvation
everything
story.
points towards and back in the Old Testament.
Right, and the parallels of even how we understand our salvation are not accidental. They're very much tied in line with the Exodus story.
Remember the word typology that we used?
Yeah.
So Exodus is the big type that is going to point towards what Jesus does.
So to kind of bridge this for y'all a little bit, I want to... Genesis kind of answers a number of different questions. And the first question that Genesis answers is, who is God? Okay, and it sets up that question. So we know God first and foremost as creator, and so the story of creation starts to explain who God is. But God is not just simply the creator, he is also the redeemer. And that's what Exodus starts to answer even further, who God is.
Sure.
He's beyond creator, he's also the recreator, the new creator, the Exodus person. So the redemption, the redeemer. So it also goes through God as judge. You go through then chapters 3 and 4 and into the story of Noah. You get God as judge and how he deals with sin and how he doesn't like sin and how he doesn't like evil. So again, the Exodus story flies right into that as he judges not just Egypt and Pharaoh, but also the gods of Egypt through the 10 plagues. So you see God as the almighty and most powerful judge, the omnipotent judge that we have. Through the story of Noah, then, you also get God as our rescuer, right? Sure. So he's the one who, again, going back to that redemption, that redeemer, the one who rescues his people from the plagues of sin, from the punishment of sin, from the destruction of sin. And again, that's the Exodus story, God rescuing his people. through Moses from the slavery and the bondage of the Egyptians. And then, of course, you get him as our protector and elector. So God who then guards his people and takes care of his people. So again, the story of Joseph, and one of the things that we noted in our Sunday school class on Sunday was people saying, think about how quickly the whole line and heritage of God's promise to Abraham could have been thwarted if they would have just killed Joseph. Yeah. But yet God seems to always be there at the center of it and protecting his lineage, protecting his people.
So related to that, it makes me think of God as fulfiller of covenant, fulfiller of promises, because covenant and promise is such a big theme, especially when we were thinking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and then Exodus really shows all these promises that you'd seen just a little bit of in Genesis. Yep. Oh, just get a little bit of it, just get a little bit. Okay, a little bit of land. Like at the end of Genesis, all they've got is a cave, you know? And then you see them get the land by the end of Exodus. Oh, they've got a few kids in Genesis. Okay, now we're going to see the multiplication of kids.
Perfect, because that's the next thing I have in my notes here.
Oh, okay.
It's perfect, because what is the relationship between God and his people?
Yeah.
Well, and that's all defined starting with the covenant, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to know what is the relationship between God and his people, you can go before the covenant with Adam and Eve. There's certainly something to be told about that, but it really...
He's always already making promises.
He's already making promises. It really comes into its fruition with his covenant that he makes with Abraham, that I will make you a great nation, and those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. So then you see the fulfillment of all of that in, again, the Exodus story. So here's the Egyptians who are cursing God, cursing his people, and God says, enough's enough, and I'm going to intervene, and I'm going to take care of my people. This didn't happen swiftly. There was years, hundreds, thousands of years.
430 years, right? From Joseph to
there you go. So
Moses,
400, right? And so there's just, but it's awesome when you step back and see the upper story of God. You can see it so clearly from our, high elevation seats, as opposed to the lower story people who maybe we don't see it as clearly.
I mean, when you're Moses or Moses' mom sitting there and hearing these, declarations of what's going to happen, it's a little bit less clear because she's 400 years after Joseph, the patriarch, and watching, her son's life threatened, right?
So then the other awesome thing is it gives us answer to why are the Israelites in Egypt to begin with, and so that's how Exodus starts. Right, and it starts with talking about and you mentioned, I'll let you share it. You appreciated the translation that the story used.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things here, and there's a pastor that we know, Pastor Chad Foster, and one of the things he even noted on the connection from Genesis to Exodus, and I hadn't realized this because I hadn't looked at this in Hebrew forever, is it starts with an and. Do you remember that it starts with a vav?
No, I didn't.
So, and they don't translate that because it's not good English to start a new story with and. But that's a connective thing. So it's saying, and, like that just means Genesis ended and now this happened.
And here's the continuation.
Exactly. It's just the next chapter in the story or whatever. But you get through, a couple, just list some sons or whatever, of Jacob that were there in Egypt or whatever. And then verse 6, now Joseph and all his brothers in that generation had died, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly great, and they're numerous, so the land was filled with them. Then a new king came who did not know Joseph. And that's a bad translation. And everything just about does that translation, other than I think like the NASB translates it a little bit more literally, or a little bit better than no.
So is that an ESV?
I've got NIV here. What do you have in your ESV?
This is an ESV. What verse again?
We're sitting there, verse 8. What do they say in verse 8?
Who did not know Joseph.
Yeah, did not know Joseph. And what I thought was interesting was that the story actually does a better job. It translates as did not regard. The literal word there, yada, is for no. But that's a word with a whole large semantic range. There's a lot of things that knowing can mean all the way. But, knowing always implies more than just like kind of head knowledge. It's heart knowledge, too. Everything from, Adam knew Eve. So it's not means more than like he knew who she was. It's obviously about their relationship with each other.
It's not like the Israelites forgot him.
No. And it's not even like the Pharaoh forgot.
Right.
They had whole books of records. We can still to this day read the records from the Egyptians listing all the chronologies and genealogies of the people that were around there.
But it's just that the influence had passed.
Yeah, exactly.
The story, it's now a story.
He's not thankful for Joseph and the salvation that Joseph brought about. Now he's the one in power. He's large and he's in
Things
charge.
Have moved
and he
changed.
Sees, these people are a threat to me. So I'm going to show that I'm powerful. That's what he knows.
So why are the Israelites a threat to the Egyptians? And that's one of the questions that are answered right away in the book of Exodus. And the main reason they're a threat is because there are so many of them.
They've just been blessed.
Apparently and again, we talk about the fulfillment.
Exactly. There's a promise, covenant fulfilled, right?
So what is it that he tells Abraham? God tells Abraham, be fruitful and multiply. God tells Noah, be fruitful and multiply. God told Adam, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this was the call that went from Adam to Noah to Abraham. And then now here are the Israelites, they're in Egypt, and what are they doing? They're breeding like rabbits.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, when they leave Egypt, doesn't it say there's like 600,000 of them or something like that? It's like a crazy number.
I think it was more than that even.
It could be. I just remember hundreds of thousands.
But you get to the point where they're so big, and that Pharaoh begins to be threatened by them.
Yes.
There's an economic threat that's there. There's a power.
He speaks
threat.
about and it's interesting because what he speaks of is he says, "Oh, I'm nervous that they'll go join with one of my enemies, and that they will leave and we'll lose them." And so it's one of those things that it sets up that Pharaoh's going to show his power by trying to keep them.
Right.
And then what does he do by trying to keep them? By oppressing them or whatever, then God comes into the situation and says, now it's time for us to exodus, to leave,
and
right?
what's awesome is the Pharaoh tries many attempts to thwart their level of breeding. So we're going to kill all your firstborn children.
Yeah.
So they, what can we do?
We'll try to have the midwives kill them.
But these Hebrew women are so strong, how can we can't.
The midwives are righteous women, they won't go
and
along with it. And
the midwives are like, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they make an excuse. Oh, the Hebrew women are so strong, we can't do it.
They have babies before we can even get there.
Before we get there. They're just running into the field, having a baby, and then going back to work. And so, I mean, that's basically how they describe it.
It is exactly the way it kind of comes out.
And they're like, so what can we do? And so
it's one of those things that reminds you that these stories, I mean, there's a lot of like narrative value to these stories. We were talking about the story of Joseph last week, and there's all the twists and the turns and the plot developments. And you look at this story, and there's all these narrative elements to it. Like when Pua and what's the other midwife's name? I don't know. Anyways, when they're sitting there and talking, and they're telling the Pharaoh's servants, "Oh, I'm sorry, they're just having the kids too fast for us to even get there." I mean, there's some incredible like dialogue that goes on sometimes there. When you get Moses talking to Pharaoh or Moses talking to God, to Yahweh, there's some really cool dialogue that goes back and forth. Shipra, thank you. I appreciate that.
Shifra.
Okay. Pua. But I mean, there's this back and forth that goes on. The attempt. So, I mean, man, we're just jumping all over the place. But the attempt to kill the firstborn, the attempt to kill Moses, a king wants to stop the promise from happening, wants to stop the Israelites.
Sounds like the beginning of Matthew.
Wow,
right?
That does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
An evil king wants to kill the firstborn and will end up ordering tons of them killed. I think there's even Jewish tradition that says that someone told the Pharaoh, "Oh, there's going to be a king of these people that's going to be born, and so why don't you kill the babies or something like that?" To tie, and again, Matthew picks up on knowing that Jewish tradition probably as he highlights that in his gospel,
which Matthew is known to be written for the Jewish audience.
Exactly.
So I mean that sets up the stage for one of the first probably big stories that we recognize and
birth of Moses.
Is the birth of Moses, right? And so that's where Moses is born in hiding, if you will.
Yeah, and there's this incredible phrase there where it says that, here's another one of those translation things, and I'm sorry, there was just a couple of these things that Dr. Chad Foster, Pastor Foster pointed out. It says when she gave birth to a child, and this is verse 2 of chapter 2, when she saw that he was a fine child or a good child, the phrase there, I don't know, this was never pointed out to me before, I just saw this then too, is ki tov, that it or he was good.
Yeah.
It was good. Does that make us think of something? Genesis 1, every single thing. It was good. It was good. It was good. It was good. And what's the first thing that was good? Light. Well, what's Moses going to be? He's going to be the light bearer. He's going to be the pre-Messiah that's going to come to the people and save them and rescue them. And in fact, when he's revealing the commandments, what's his face doing? It's shining because he was up there with God on the top of the mountain, right?
The transfiguration is there.
Exactly.
And
so there's a lot of cool stuff in there.
So there's a lot of links, and we can get lost in a lot of that stuff. So, I mean, just the storyline, though, is what we find is then, and this is what I want to kind of get to, and I want to get to a part that's real near and dear to your heart, because what you find is Moses is born in hiding. He's, as you know the story, placed in a basket.
An ark, literally.
An ark, and that's the translation, is literally an ark.
Yeah, someone else being
in
saved
fact,
by an ark.
The same exact word
Same
used
word.
For Noah and his ark. The little basket that Moses was placed in, the same word as that giant ship.
Yeah, exactly.
So part of the understanding of an ark was a saving vessel.
Yes.
It's not just a floating vessel, it's a saving vessel. So there's something very unique and specific that was intended with that word. But
physical and spiritual survival.
So Moses is then, and here's the great, you can see God twist is what I would call it. Moses is rescued by a princess. Princess says, I don't know who to take care of this. We need to find someone to take care of this baby. Thank God for the princess who decides to not just kill the baby. She obviously had a heart. And so who does she choose but Moses' own mom to be the nursemaid for her own daughter or her own son? What we don't know, and the Bible just doesn't tell us, is how long was that relationship. Was it just during the infant years, as long as she was a nursemaid, or was it
until they weaned him, right?
Until they weaned him.
It's one of those questions.
I always assumed that, but it never said. And I was.
I did. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know, and maybe it does. Somebody said, "Well, wasn't Moses raised by his mom?" And I was like, "Well, I've never thought it that way."
Oh, you're right. Just as when the child grew older, yeah.
Yeah, and it just kind of moves on.
Yeah,
So I don't know if he was raised by his mom or not. I always assumed he wasn't, but apparently this person I was talking to always assumed he was. And
so there's all these parallels between Moses and Jesus that we're going to see. Like if there's parallels between Joseph and Jesus, the parallels between Moses and Jesus are even more. Like
and the parallels between
birth right there, and then
Israelites or God's people and us.
Yes,
and
exactly.
We'll talk about that on Sunday a lot more. But
you got like these secret years of Moses's like growing up.
Yeah,
like just with Jesus, you get the birth narrative. Oh, the miracle birth, and then next time we see Jesus, there's one story of him 12 years old at the temple, but really the next time you see him is his ministry. And it's the same with Moses. It's miracle birth story, and then we'll get this vague reference to childhood, and the next time we see him is when his ministry is essentially going to begin. Right. It's even like the hidden revealed kind of thing. Like Jesus comes, then he's hidden. Then he comes out, and he's hidden again. And there's that back and forth. So same with Moses.
We just don't know. But we pick up on Moses when he's a young man.
Yep.
And here's the parallel I love to use with this. Okay, we were just talking about football and college football. So I was born and raised a Texan, and I take a lot of pride as a Texan.
That's right.
But I went to school in Nebraska. My parents are from Nebraska, so I was also born and raised a Nebraska Cornhuskers fan. When I was in Nebraska, everybody was like, "Oh, you Texan, blah blah blah." Now and then, whenever I live in Texas, everybody's like, "Oh, you Nebraskan, you Nebraskan,
they think
you Nebraskan."
You're Nebraskan sometimes, yeah.
And I get it because I talk about Nebraska and the Cornhuskers a lot, but. And then sometimes, I kind of feel like that's a little bit where Moses was in his life.
Where do I belong? Right?
Where do I belong? He knows he's not an Egyptian. The Bible's very clear on that. He knows he doesn't resonate with the Egyptians. He knows that it's not his people.
So if you've watched the movie The Ten Commandments or The Prince of Egypt, where there's like this amazing revelation that all of a sudden happens, and Moses is like, "What? Oh, I'm a Hebrew." That's not really.
That's not how it happened. No. So he knows he's not an Egyptian.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not like the Hebrew people accept him, and in fact, he kills an Egyptian to rescue a Hebrew person, and the Hebrew people
they throw it back
see
in his
this
face,
and they throw it back in his face, like, "Are you going to kill me like you did that Egyptian?" And so Moses, now feeling like he has no place, no home, nowhere where he belongs, he runs. And it's kind of interesting as we think about it. He runs and he finds himself with the Midianites, who are a non-Hebrew, nomadic, but faithful, God-fearing people.
This is interesting.
So that tells you a little bit that the covenant was seen and believed by more than just the Israelites.
Absolutely.
That God's people was a lot broader than just a race and a culture.
It's anyone who follows after God is God's people.
Exactly.
And so even though Reuel, my son's name,
that's
Jethro.
Where I was getting to.
Exactly. Anyone that follows after God,
So Jethro is the Midianite priest who Joseph meets his daughter and marries his daughter. Moses rather.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Moses meets his daughter and marries Jethro's daughter. So, long story short, Jethro and Reuel are the same person, and that's where you got your name for your son.
Exactly. Yeah.
But here's what's awesome about this is I believe that is really where Moses learned his faith.
Yeah, I would agree.
I believe that Moses, as an Egyptian Hebrew, if you will, probably was a very confused faith. I bet you could see some of the Egyptian faith.
You think he was
in
a
there.
little syncretistic, maybe?
A little bit of a syncretism there. I would suspect that.
Yeah.
But between Jethro and Moses in that relationship, which is over a number of years.
Yeah, because I mean, he's probably in his 20s or something like that when he leaves, and he's 40 when he goes back. I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
So he learns his faith there. And so that's kind of cool because then now Moses is taught the faith by his father-in-law.
Yeah.
And life goes on as normal, as so Moses thought, until there was a big intervention. And the big intervention happens at the burning bush.
Yeah.
And Moses is doing his shepherding and doing his thing. What happens, there's a burning bush. And so I've talked about this on Sunday mornings during our Sunday school hour. But it says very specifically in the burning bush that the angel of the Lord appeared to him through the burning bush. And that's what we call in the Hebrew is a Malach Yahweh, right?
Yep.
The angel of the Lord. You see it, the first time you see the angel of the Lord that I'm aware of, at least I'm thinking, is Sodom and Gomorrah. You see it in Genesis when Abraham and Sarah are in their tent and they're on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. The angel of the Lord stops, say to Abraham and Sarah,
Three visitors there.
There are three visitors, and the middle one was the angel of the Lord.
Angel of the Lord, yep.
And you're pregnant, you're going to have a child. And they laughed at the angel of the Lord, which I wouldn't do. And they move on. He's not called the angel of the Lord again, but in the Passover you'll see is referred to as the angel of death. Okay, but we still believe it's probably the same character, and we call it the pre-incarnate Christ.
Yeah.
You can just say Christ.
Reminder that Christ comes to save, but also to
judge.
Yeah.
So he was there to judge Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And here he is to deliver the message and the calling of God to Moses. He's there to pass over his people in the Passover.
Save them, yeah.
And to save them, and also to judge those who do not have the blood on the doorpost.
Yeah.
And again, the fulfillment of Abraham and his calling.
Absolutely.
Those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed.
Yeah.
And so just kind of an awesome, and the angel of the Lord, that is a very unique thing, and it'll come up again and again throughout as we're reading this.
Yeah.
But that's when everything changes for Moses.
Is at the burning bush there.
Is at the burning bush.
Yeah, he's wandering around in the wilderness, out in these new areas. He sees the burning bush, goes over to check it out, and the angel of the Lord starts talking to him, and he gets to talk back. So it's not just God talking to him. It's this great dialogue going back and forth where God reveals himself and says, I'm the God of your father.
Yeah, the first thing he tells him to do is take off your sandals.
Yeah, exactly.
Take off your sandals. You're on holy ground, which I always thought was neat. When you think about that, we talk about the omnipresence of God, meaning God is everywhere at all times. But so why would one ground be more holy than another? We talk about a degree of revelatory, that God reveals himself more fully in certain places and in certain moments.
Yep.
Well, in this instance, where the burning bush was there, God was revealing himself more fully, which makes that ground more holy in a sense, special, more set apart, which is the word holy.
Well, and it'll have future, because this is the same place that God will tell Moses, here's a sign for your people. When you guys are leaving, like I already know, you are going to go, you're going to rescue your people, and you're going to bring them out, okay? There's no question about it. Here's a sign for you and for them. Bring them back to this same place, because this is a holy place. Yeah.
So, but think about that. Here's just to kind of dive into a little bit of the lore story. One of the things that I love about our Lutheran Church is we still hold on to sacred space.
Yes.
That the sanctuary is set apart for a very specific purpose of praise and worship to God.
Yeah.
We have a chancel area, and that chancel area, that is where the Word of God is spoken, and that is also where the sacraments are given.
Yep.
So we call that more sacred space. We would call that holy space. And if you remember as a kid, if you ever were running around the church and ran up onto the chancel area and somebody goes, get down from there, that's a holy spot. You can't run around up there.
Yeah.
There's some truth to that.
Absolutely.
That's why we reverence ourselves when we go into the chancel area. That's why we bow. That's why we kneel at times at the communion rail. We don't do that at Hope, but oftentimes churches will. That's why you, just in the chancel area alone, you won't see anything in that chancel area outside of a pulpit and the altar where the sacraments are given. The baptismal font should be up in the chancel area, but it's not really a good spot for it. But the reasoning is that is a place where God is revealing himself through baptism, revealing himself through his body and blood, and revealing himself through his word in a very special, unique, set-aside way. Just something to think about if you're new to the Lutheran Church and don't know why maybe we do things, set things up a little bit different than maybe some other non-traditional churches. That's one of the reasons why we still believe in that sacred space.
So, I mean, it really brings us into this important, so you're talking about where God is, where presence is, and that really, so whether he's in the burning bush, or whether it's ongoing, because what's the big reveal that God does during the burning bush? Moses says, well, okay, what if I go to the people and I say the God of our fathers is there, and they'll say, well, who are you? Who is this God? Well, God of our fathers apparently is, only tells them a little bit, and so he actually gives the name, I am who I am. And it's this really strange Hebrew construction, and people still sit there and argue about exactly what it means. Beyond it's the verbs for to be, and it's this idea of kind of a present, past, and ongoing action in terms of presence. And so really God, what he's saying is the most important thing for anyone to know about me is that I am present. So I was present with your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob back before. I am present with you right now, even when you can't see me. Even when it's hidden right now because you're sitting there and you're a slave in Egypt, I am just as much with you right now in this moment, and I will be with you in those moments when the plagues come or these signs come, when the Passover happens, when you're sitting there and shaking your boots on the edge of the Red Sea,
really scary.
Because the Pharaoh and his chariots are about to pour down on you.
He'll be there. He'll be there when you doubt him. He'll be there when you're angry at him. He'll be there because I think the Israelites doubted him. Yeah. The Israelites in their wandering were mad at him.
In their highest moments and their lowest moments.
Their lowest moments. It was better when we were enslaved. At least we had a hot pot of food to sit around. Why did God lead us all the way to this river so that we could just suffer and die at our enemy over there? By the way, the next time actually I think you see the angel of the Lord is the angel of the Lord goes in front of the Israelites through the Red Sea.
Oh, did you really? I'd forgotten.
I need to double check on that, but I think it's the angel of the Lord who the Israelites end up following, but it's in a pillar of cloud kind of a thing.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
I'll double check on that. But
and that when he's here's the other important thing is his presence can be good or bad. And so his presence is
good for those who bless him.
Exactly, and bad for those ones who aren't. Because later on, as they're sitting there and having these interactions between Pharaoh and Moses, Pharaoh even acknowledged, okay, apparently you got a God. Apparently he's present here, but it's not good for me. And so he doesn't go to that. He's got all these signs. He could sit there and start believing in that, Yahweh, and be part of the kingdom. Instead, he sets himself up and he hardens his heart against God. It's not that he doesn't know that God's present. It's that he doesn't like the presence. And you sit there and you think back to Genesis. All those people, people that certainly acknowledged, what they saw, but it wasn't God for them. It was God against them. So I think that's a really big theme is that you get here, God is present and he's present for those who trust in him, that he has a relationship with, and he continues that relationship. And so for us, even when things don't look good for us, God's present for us, and we have this hope. And like I was talking about in the sermon last week, is God's going to work all things to my good. I just don't know the timeline. Whether you're one of those, think about the Israelites or the Hebrews who sat there and lived in Egypt 50 years after Joseph died. Well, they and their next generation, the next generation was all going to die in slavery in Egypt or something like that. But eventually it would come.
Here it is in verse 19 of chapter 14. In fact, chapter 14 is all about the Israelites grumbling and complaining when they get to the Red Sea, and they're like, you've led us to our death. I told you, Moses, leave us alone. But anyways, you get to 19, it says the angel of God. Now, it's a little different construct, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them.
To protect them.
To protect them. They stood between the think about it. So the angel of who we said the pre-incarnate Christ came and stood in between their enemies. That represented evil. That represented slavery. That represented bondage. That represented.
He stands in between them and death.
And death, right?
Oh,
and then Moses puts up his hands. The Red Sea parts, and then they walk on dry ground. So it's just absolutely.
That's a great scene from the
it
Ten
really
Commandments,
is.
by the way.
And with the angel of the Lord behind
The
them.
old
and then-
Charlton Heston, with the.
I've never seen that.
You've never seen.
No.
All right, Heather, your job is to make sure your husband sees the Ten Commandments this Easter.
I can't get past Charlton Heston. I don't know why.
Charlton Heston.
Okay.
All right. Someone show this man the Ten Commandments this year at Easter. It's on every single year.
Do you like Charlton Heston?
Never heard of it.
Wow. All right. Apparently, we're having a watch party at Hope this coming Easter. We're going to watch the Ten Commandments and see that which prefigured the Easter resurrection.
There's a cartoon about Moses. I like that one.
The Prince of Egypt
Prince
one?
of Egypt.
Yeah, no, that was a good one,
I've seen
too.
that one.
but-
That's about him as a boy.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's got good and bad. I like that one. I watched that one with the kids a long time ago.
Help if you can, real quick.
Okay.
And to kind of draw some conclusion factors
Yeah.
in this. The parallels between the Exodus story, and we're going to jump into this again next week because there's a big point I want to hammer, and I'll give you a precursor of it. But so that we don't forget, what is the parallels between Exodus, Moses, and us?
I mean, there's so
Because
many.
the
that's hard to
story,
start with, yeah.
I will say, of all the things that we will read in the Bible, this story, this chapter, probably speaks in that typology sense,
Yes.
paints the picture of our lives and our salvation and our hope more than anything.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, remember, when the Jewish people talk about salvation for the rest of the Old Testament,
Right.
they will always go back to the Exodus.
Yes.
And they will
Not
always
only
remember that. And
God
they
will
know-
always remind them,
Yes.
I am the
Yeah,
Lord your
yeah,
God
he said
who
that.
brought you out of the land of Egypt.
Absolutely. He will remind them constantly of that as their greatest salvation event. Not that it wasn't going to be eclipsed, all right? I mean, there's all kinds of signs. In fact, Hebrew tradition said it was going to be, that there was going to be a
Yeah.
greater Messiah than Moses, and that's why Moses is standing there on the Mount of Transfiguration talking to Jesus about his exodus, literally in the Greek, exodon, his exodus that he was going to do. So, I mean, there's a million crossovers. I mean, the best one, probably is the Passover, though.
Yes.
I mean, because on that night, what does God tell them to do? I mean, like all the parallels are there's a plethora, but he tells them that death is coming, essentially, and the only way you're going to be saved from death is by having the blood of a lamb on your doorpost. And you will eat unleavened bread that night. Well, man, you just can't go in any clearer way to the story that's about to come to us in the gospel then, and see that you will be saved by the blood of the lamb, which is Jesus himself. Not some other random lamb, but the blood of Jesus Christ will literally be applied to us to save us.
So here's and that obviously we draw a lot of conclusions to the Lord's Supper through this,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
we believe it is a celebration of the Passover. People say, well, what about the body and blood of Christ? Is it symbolic? Is it not? One of the arguments I always like to go to, beyond where Luther just simply reminds us that is means is, and in the Bible it just simply says this is, but also in the Passover itself, they must consume, it was real blood and real lamb. They consumed of the body, and so it wasn't a typology. They didn't pretend to. It was a real consumption of real body and
it
real
actually
blood.
did something, because anyone who
And
didn't
it was a
have
performative
it died,
act.
right?
Right. In the Lord's Supper, we also believe that we consume of the body.
And it actually does
And it
something. It
does
doesn't just
something. It's a
remind us of
performative
something.
act.
Yeah.
So, and that maybe bring one more thing to get into, but how about the Exodus itself? So the Passover is one area, but just the Exodus itself, how Israel, through the waters of the Red Sea, or it's actually called the Reed Sea, and people assume it's the Red Sea, but anyways, but through the waters of the Red Sea, passed through the waters, and through that, their enemy was destroyed. Death was destroyed. They received new life and a new promise.
When they leave Egypt.
They leave.
Egypt, the name Egypt literally means place of constraint.
Yeah, they leave bondage, slavery.
Yep.
They leave impending death. Their enemy is destroyed, and they are given new life, new promise, new hope.
Yeah.
So not to give away a lot of what the sermon is going to be about Sunday, but this all points to baptism.
Yes.
And even the scriptures in 1 Corinthians makes that exact mention to it. But in our baptism, we leave the old enemy, sin which binds and destroys. We literally receive sin. Sin literally receives its death in the waters of baptism. That's Romans 6, if you want to look that up. Right? We pass through the waters of baptism to a new promise and a new hope and a salvation. So the parallels are just really awesome. And so we oftentimes will point to baptism, but that's not. But it's not just baptism, though. It's the whole story of our salvation in Christ.
The cross is there.
It's the cross, and baptism is never to be separated or differentiated
baptism
from the
connects
cross.
us to the cross. That's there in Romans 6
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah.
So it's not like I'm saying, oh, this is baptism, but not Jesus. No, it's all Jesus. It's all the cross. Baptism, we say, is one of the means by which we receive that gift of the cross, and just like the Red Sea was one of the means by which they received the gift of His salvation. And God used the Red Sea as a tool. Here's the thing, and something to think about, and you'll find this. We as Lutherans are very sacramental believers, and what that means is the sacraments, by our definition, are tangible resources used by God to give His intangible gifts. Okay, and meaning He uses the tangible things on earth. So let me use an example of Moses. Could the angel of the Lord just simply talk to Moses? He could have, but He uses, instead of just talking to him, a burning bush. Why did He use? Why? It makes no sense that He would use a burning bush. Well, He does. So that's a tangible to them.
Why did there need to be a lamb? Why did there
need to be a lamb?
Bread? Why did there even need to be signs?
Why did there need to be
all the plagues? Why
could He have not have picked them up and floated them across the Red Sea? Why did they have to part the Red Sea? Why? All these things. Why does God work in the physical, tangible? There's an incarnational understanding to this, the same reason, because God is never absent and vacated from this world, but He's always active and moving and working in this world. We believe in a tangible faith when it comes to our salvation, that we flesh and blood will live again in resurrection. God uses bread and wine to give His gifts. He used water to give His gifts. We'll eventually read the story of Isaiah, where Isaiah's lips are redeemed by the burning coals. It's like, couldn't have God just said, you're forgiven,
you're good, don't
it's
worry,
good. No, we're going to use a coal instead. I would have rather the words only. But there's more examples of this, and Exodus really starts to bring this out of God using earth, using the world He created, using His creation to work His salvation and work His mysteries.
Absolutely.
He could have done it all without it, but it's not what He did.
And there's some of that that's just, some of it makes sense. Like, okay, we're physical, tangible people, and so the more that God can do physically and tangibly in front of us helps us and strengthens our faith. And there's some of it that, we'll never understand exactly why God does it one way instead of another way.
Right.
He just says that is the way that it must be. And so we trust God, and we see, man alive, it's consistent from Genesis through Revelation, and it seems to work, doesn't it?
And that's the important thing, is we see a consistent way in which God works. And so when we get to the sacraments, it's consistent.
And we're not surprised by it, nor should we try to do something different with it and all of a sudden turn it into just a
over spiritualize it.
Yeah, exactly.
And no, let's stay consistent with how God has always worked, which is used tangible objects to do His non-tangible bidding. So anyways, there's just some thoughts
stuff,
for you. There's a lot of wonderful things in chapter 4 of the story here. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to sit down and read it. Sometimes I think these conversations are good before. Sometimes I think they're good after. I think either way.
Anytime.
Sit down and read it. Read it slowly and really ponder on those things and see if there would be a challenge. See how your life parallels with the Exodus story. Moses didn't have it all easy, neither did the Israelites, but God certainly blessed them. And may God bless you too. Thank you all for joining us.
Sure.